In 1776, in an inquiry into the nature and causes of the wealth of nations, Adam Smith wrote about the role of the invisible hand of the market in guiding the correct economic allocations that will best promote the public interest. Ever since then, economies that describe themselves with lesser or greater degrees of accuracy as free market economies have struggled with finding the right levels of economic regulation. As it confronts crypto, the developed world is now finding itself at a historic crossroads that will be defined by whether it can find that balance between free markets and regulation. Ready? Let's go. Today, we are going to discuss the big, scary Biden administration executive order on cryptocurrencies. Was it really just nothing? Or are there some things we can learn by reading in between the lines? We'll also talk about a news item related to the evolution of governance in Cardano projects, not just Cardano, the whole project, but actual Cardano projects. And we'll also talk about what could be a pretty big gathering for Cardano community members in October. If you find that these videos are bringing you value each weekday, please consider delegating to the Army of Spies stake pool, ticker AOS. Here it is, dun dun dun, the executive order on ensuring responsible development of digital assets. I feel like Darth Vader in paper form just walked into the room. I know the music I just did was nothing like the Darth Vader music, but you know what I'm saying. I feel like we've been waiting for this for so long. And like we talked about in the video yesterday, all the reports were kind of that we're just going to get a bunch of requests for more reports from the different agencies. This is going to be the White House asking all the different agencies to give them reports. But as I read through the executive order today, I think there are some things we can learn by reading in between the lines. I mean, even just starting with the title, they called this thing Executive Order on Ensuring Responsible Development of Digital Assets. This is the kind of title you'd expect, but it's a different title than if it said Executive Order on Promoting the Development of Digital Assets or Executive Order on Promoting Innovation in the Digital Asset Space, something like that. Of course, we were never going to get that title. That basically could have never happened. But this title definitely, I mean, there's a lot of head nodding towards regulation, ensuring responsible development. Right there, they're telling you, hey, there's going to be a heavy dose of regulation. Buckle up. So let's get into it. Section 1 is on policy. They note the $3 trillion run-up in 2021 in the crypto space from that $14 billion valuation in 2016. That's from November 2016 to November 2021. They also mention CBDCs front and center. I love it. I mean, how many lines in? You know, there may be like a dozen lines in here. They say, very innocently, monetary authorities globally are also exploring and in some cases introducing central bank digital currencies, CBDCs. It's like, hey, not sure if you knew, but all these other central banks are exploring CBDCs. It's so innocent. Like, hey, we should probably do this too, just to keep up. They say that instead of saying, hey, just so you know, we've been working on CBDCs with MIT for years. We've been planning to do this for years. Now we're just kind of, we're going to like slowly spring it upon you, but we've actually been preparing this for years. Very innocent. I love it. They also say something I legitimately do love. They say the US has an interest in responsible financial innovation. There's a lot of language in here about the danger of crypto broadly, and we're going to get into all that. But I love that they, in the first policy paragraph, they even have a nod toward the need to embrace financial innovation. I think they realize that crypto is so global. If the US doesn't embrace it, the innovation will happen elsewhere. We've been telling them this for years. For years, the crypto space has been saying to the government, hey, if you don't embrace crypto, it's just going to go on. Crypto is this crazy, unstoppable beast, and it's going to go on outside the US if you guys don't embrace it. There's a lot of innovation that's going to happen here, and you have to be a part of that, or you're going to fall behind. So it looks like they've actually They're actually giving a little lip service to that. Then they do what Washington loves to do, and that's cue the parade of goblins, all the dangers, all the reasons why they have to regulate. These include dangers such as risks to consumers, investors, business protections, financial stability, financial system integrity, combating and preventing crime and illicit finance, national security, human rights. You can tell we're getting into kind of the softer, more philosophical ones here. Human rights, financial inclusion and equity, climate change and pollution. I think it's sort of it's kind of funny. They sort of hit all the broadly acceptable items, categories of items there, and until they get to national security. And then it becomes, I think people on the other side of the aisle would probably say that it becomes a little bit more partisan when they hit human rights, financial inclusion and equity, climate change and pollution. Those are obviously more controversial ones. They put them at the end. So it wouldn't be completely inaccurate to characterize that section 1 as a bunch of ideological fluff. But in section 2, objectives, this is the part where we can start reading in between the lines. They tell us we must protect consumers, investors, and businesses. Notice the inclusion of businesses in that section. They are not just protecting consumers and investors, they also need to protect businesses. There are a lot of businesses on Wall Street, guys. They're going to protect businesses. They mention the absence of oversight and disclosure of risks. So, oversight and disclosure of risks. These are things that agencies like the SEC engage in and create huge burdens on enterprises doing anything that requires SEC oversight and disclosure of risks. Obviously, it's not just the SEC. There's regulation is in large parcel oversight, and disclosure is a big piece of regulation, but the SEC really specializes in these things. Maybe, the banking industry, obviously oversight is a huge pillar there, but disclosure for the SEC, disclosure is part and parcel to everything the SEC does. And the burden of creating those disclosures is probably a lot more than most people realize. It is a gigantic amount in legal fees to accomplish the amount of disclosure that's required for a lot of the things that a lot of the things we do in crypto. Doing that in the traditional world requires huge expenditures in legal fees just to create those disclosures. And we'll get into that in just a second. The traditional regulation versus crypto regulation nexus. They also talk about market failures at exchanges and trading platforms. So this is pretty big. They're going to hang this "we must protect consumers, investors, and businesses" thing, at least partially, on the market failures at exchanges and trading platforms that we've experienced in crypto. As you are well aware, the robbery forest is replete with ugly things that they can sort of bring out into the consciousness of the American public and pretty easily, I think, convince the American public that they must do the things that they want to do because so many hundreds of millions and billions of dollars have been lost in this exploit of this platform, this hack of this exchange. I mean, we've got a long list of thievery in the robbery forest, and it's a little shocking. I mean, when the American public gets that total figure, the amount of money that's been lost at crypto exchanges and trading platforms just over the last 5 years, I mean, it's going to shock the conscience a little bit. Then in part B here, they tell us things like issuers, exchanges, trading platforms, and intermediaries should be subject to regulatory and supervisory standards that govern the traditional infrastructures and financial firms. So this is interesting. Here they're introducing a decision. I'm going to call it a decision. They're saying that the same regulatory and supervisory standards that govern traditional infrastructure and financial firms should govern the crypto equivalents. In fact, they give us this little quote, this little idiom here: same business, same risks, same rules. This is pretty big. This is a pretty big statement of policy. I mean, they're basically saying, hey, if you're doing the same business as Goldman Sachs or JP Morgan or the New York Stock Exchange, you should have to comply with the same rules. Obviously, if we put the burden of complying with those same rules on a lot of the crypto equivalents of those business, obviously those are really big businesses I just cited. And most crypto enterprises do little pieces of those things. But if they applied the same rules to the crypto platforms doing those same businesses, the burden of complying with those rules is going to be too great for the crypto equivalents to be able to comply. They're not. I mean, we have the entities in the traditional space have gigantic compliance departments filled with attorneys and various types of compliance professionals, and it's a huge bill. It's a huge bill at the end of the year just complying with all these rules. Crypto platforms aren't going to be able to do it. So then you ask yourself, how many crypto platforms would be left who can figure out how to comply with these rules? Or does this result in the JP Morgans and the Goldman Sachs of the world just creating crypto arms that replace those enterprises? This is all on the table. We don't know how this turns out. Of course, the rallying cry of crypto is, but who are they going to go after? We're decentralized. These platforms are all decentralized. Who would they even go after? Well, unfortunately, a lot of these crypto enterprises in DeFi, we'll call them platforms or protocols, a lot of them have blank labs behind the protocol. And as we've seen from Uniswap Labs having to sort of blacklist certain tokens in their interface, there is a certain amount of regulatory pressure that can be exerted on these blank labs behind these protocols. And of course, there's a difference between the interface and the protocol. The Uniswap protocol did not blacklist those tokens necessarily, but the Uniswap Labs interface did have to. But you have to ask yourself, how differently does it look if all of the interfaces run by the founding blank labs had to comply with these rules? I mean, Uniswap Labs was well established. Uniswap protocol and Uniswap Labs were both well established before that happened. But going forward, how does it look if all of these blank labs, the entities behind these protocols, if they have to worry about what the SEC or the myriad other regulatory agencies that'll come up in this executive order, if they have to worry about what they're going to say as they launch these protocols, it's going to have an impact on what they're willing to launch because of the regulatory pressure on them as the, sort of founding entity of these protocols. Of course, that calculus all changes if the Hester Purses of the world, you probably know she's a commissioner at the SEC, Gary Gensler is the head of the SEC, but we've got characters at regulatory agencies like the SEC who really understand crypto and want to embrace the innovation of crypto. And, they're in favor of things like safe harbors. Like, hey, we realize that crypto platforms, protocols, projects, they're going to launch certain things and it takes some time to get to decentralization. So we're gonna have a safe harbor period maybe, of 2 years where they can launch something. And as long as they're decentralized after the end of this 2-year period, then we'll just say that was a safe harbor and we're going to look past, them being not decentralized at the start of the period. And we've talked in the past how there's at least a strong perception that being decentralized is exculpatory when it comes to these tests for securities, like the Howey test. They spend the rest of the section going through the rest of the risks they identified. And then we get to a big section on CBDCs. And predictably, they spend this entire section explaining why they must explore CBDCs and all of the benefits that CBDCs might hold. And here we get to the first report. They say within 180 days of the date of this order, the Secretary of Treasury, in consultation with a bunch of other characters like the Secretary of State, Attorney General, Secretary of Homeland Security, will produce a report for the President on the future of money and payment systems, including the conditions that drive broad adoption of digital assets and a whole bunch of questions about the potential implications of a United States central bank digital currency. I think this is where we kind of get into a little bit of puppet theater. It's sort of like the White House is asking, Treasury and these other heads of agencies to, explain to the White House why we really should create a central bank digital currency, and they'll have 180 days to sort of like come up with their case as to why we really, really need a central bank digital currency. I love this section right here. The chairman of the board of governors of the Federal Reserve System, Jay Powell, is encouraged to continue to research and report on the extent to which CBDCs could improve the efficiency and reduce the cost of existing and future payment systems. So they're kind of, it's a little bit of a hat tip to the well understood fact that the Federal Reserve has been working on this CBDC thing for a long, long time. So they're not even going to pretend like they're asking the Fed to start researching CBDCs. They're going to encourage them to continue to research and report on CBDCs. This section down here, also interesting. The Attorney General has 180 days to tell the White House whether legislative changes would be necessary to issue a United States CBDC. So they're asking the Attorney General to decide whether or not they even need to include Congress on this. And within 210 days, provide to the president a corresponding legislative proposal to do whatever he needs to do as far as CBDCs go. If my calculations are correct, that 210 days would put us right in the first week of October, which is relevant because the current administration has got to worry about midterm elections on November 8th, a month later, when there could be a change in the number of seats they hold in Congress. This next section is about those measures to protect consumers, investors, and businesses we talked about at the start. This is going to be the one where the Secretary of the Treasury, Janet Yellen, is going to work with agencies like the FTC, the SEC, the CFTC, the federal banking agencies, and the Consumer Financial Protections Bureau. Down below in this section, they say the chair of the SEC, the chairman of the CFTC, the chair of the Federal Reserve, and the chair of the board of directors of the FDIC and the Comptroller of the Currency, of course, are each encouraged to consider the extent to which investor and market protection measures within their respective jurisdictions may be used to address the risks of digital assets and whether additional measures may be needed. This is that section where Gary Gensler, in the words of Denzel Washington to Ethan Hawke in Training Day, is going to tax that ass. He's probably going to have to fight with those members of the SEC staff who are a little bit more enlightened and kind of on our side in terms of crypto. But he's probably going to try to do all those things he's been threatening in all those speeches over the last months. This section also has a requirement of a report from the Attorney General, along with the Secretary of the Treasury and the Secretary of Homeland Security, on the role of law enforcement agencies in detecting, investigating, and prosecuting criminal activity related to digital assets. This will include any recommendations on regulatory or legislative actions. You know what they're going to ask for? They're going to talk about anti-money laundering, anti-terrorist fundraising, anti-narco trafficking, anti-human trafficking. They're going to talk about all those things, and they're going to ask for more KYC. One final thing I will point out is that stablecoins are mentioned 5 different times in this executive order, and it's often alongside sort of a laundry list of digital assets. Even in the definition of digital assets, they say, for example, digital assets include cryptocurrencies, stablecoins, and CBDCs. We can read between the lines here. They're going to treat stablecoins differently than they treat other cryptocurrencies. And as you would guess, I think I'm guessing that's because they're worried that of the impact of stablecoins when they're in direct market competition with their precious CBDCs. I think you can imagine that for any central banker, a nightmare would be that the world embraces something that looks a lot like JED or any other stablecoin to the exclusion of the central bank digital currencies that they themselves could control. Moving from U.S. government to Cardano project governance, I want to extend a warm congratulations to the ADAO community and a member of the Army of Spies, a watcher of this channel, R. Riley, who's related to that project. The post says ADAO community has partnered with Liqwid Finance to build the Agora governance system. Maybe you've heard the rumors, but we're finally ready to make it official. ADAO community has partnered with Liqwid Finance to build the Agora governance system, which we've talked about before on this channel. Find out more at our Medium page. Congratulations, guys. I love that Cardano has groups like this that projects can go to help them with this governance piece, because the governance piece is so tricky, and figuring how to approach it is probably going to be a long evolution that we're going to go through, and every crypto ecosystem is going to go through. The governance thing is really big. And I love that Liqwid, as always, is so smart to immediately enlist outside help on this. Finally, there's going to be a 2-day event for Cardano community members in Denver, Colorado on October 14th and 15th. I'm not affiliated with this event in any way, and I don't know too much about what's actually going to happen, but Denver's a great town and this hotel looks amazing. So I hope that any of you who go have a fantastic time, and I will talk to you tomorrow.